This happened back in the spring of 2007 when my buddy and I were doing a month-long backpacking trip across Europe. We had started in London and took every imaginable mode of transportation through France, the Netherlands, Germany, Austria, and finally ended our trip in Italy. Due to a bus delay, we arrived in Rome several hours later than scheduled. The folks at the hostel said they had assumed we weren't going to show and rented out our beds to other travelers. Not to worry, they told us. There was a spillover property across the city they rented out for such an occasion. This was a 2-bedroom apartment with several bunk beds packed into the rooms. Here we spent our last 3 nights in Europe along with a group of young Spaniards we ended up going out clubbing with and having a blast. On our last day, our Spanish friends left and were replaced by a large group of 10 Latin American men and 1 woman that we met briefly before heading out for our final night in Rome. There was a bit of a language barrier, but everyone seemed nice and we headed out separately. My friend and I got back to our bunks around 2 a.m., and about an hour later, the other group shambled in. Clearly pretty drunk, they all got in their bunks and within 15 minutes the lights were out and they were snoring away. All but one. One of the young men, on an upper bunk directly across from me, was still awake, seemingly playing with his phone. My eyes were shut and I was starting to drift off to sleep just as a bright light hit me directly in the face and I heard the shutter click sound on his camera phone. Annoyed, but not wanting to be confrontational, I turned onto my back, facing slightly away, hoping he would just go to bed. Instead, he continued taking photos of me, whispering obscenities, in English, that I won't repeat here. I realized that passivity was the wrong strategy when he got down off his bunk and crept over to mine. For a few moments he stood over me, apparently with his hands on the upper bunk, where my traveling companion slept. At this point, my heart rate went through the roof and I quickly started considering options. A cold realization suddenly hit me. We were in a private apartment with no other travelers or staff in the building. If I confronted this person, he might awake his companions. I had no idea whether any of these men were dangerous, and if they were, we might be in for the fight of our lives. If they were so inclined, they could probably kill us and just say we had left on schedule and we'd never been heard from again. I was thinking of kicking this dude in the stomach and bolting for the kitchen to grab a knife when he suddenly knelt down and reached into my bed. That was it. I sat up sharply and got right in his face, asking, "You fucking need something, dude?" As menacingly as I could. He froze. Without saying a word, he got up and walked into the common area. I heard the bathroom door shut. About a minute later, he got back in his bunk, and 10 minutes after that, he too was snoring peacefully. I was wide awake, fully dressed and ready for battle the rest of the night. Shortly before dawn, I woke my friend and we got out of there. He did ask, "What was that guy doing last night?" But I have no idea how aware he was of the whole thing. We were on our flight to Heathrow a couple hours later and have never discussed it since. So yeah, creepy photographer dude, if I see you in public you might meet these hands. Creep. Hey everyone. Wanted to share an unsettling story that I usually try to forget. I live in China. I first came here in 2013 when I was 20 years old. At the time, I was living in the capital. I was and am a student, and during breaks from school, I enjoyed using the money I made teaching English to go traveling alone. In general, I think China is a really safe country as compared with the US. I have been followed and harassed countless times in the USA, but it just doesn't really happen here. People stare at me in the street. I am very pale and I have curly red hair. But aside from this encounter, I have never felt unsafe in any significant way. So around the end of my semester that year, I decided to travel to a city in western China. It is a city with a rich history, and I was excited to go check out the monuments and relics there. I stuffed a huge backpack and went on a 14-hour train in a cheap hard seat to get there. For anyone who has never been to China or taken a sitting or standing train here, just imagine the most crowded, loud, and uncomfortable metro or bus ride ever. For 12+ hours. People smoke in the carriage, and I saw someone pee outside the bathroom. But really, no big. I had traveled very far by myself before, so I handled it all pretty well. At the time, the city didn't have a very well-developed metro system, so after arriving, I had to take a bus to find my hostel. Due to narrow streets and a high density of tourists, I was trapped in traffic for hours before I finally found the tiny hostel, just inside the city wall. I was really tired when I arrived, but the hostel was beautiful and there were a load of people hanging out in the courtyard. The courtyard was partially open and beautifully adorned with plants and bird cages. I sat there drawing in my sketchbook for a while and chatted a little with some of the Chinese guests. After a while, I noticed that a very gaunt and spindly boy with big, staring blue eyes was sitting in the corner watching me. Eventually, he sort of slouched over to me and struck up a conversation. I judged him to be about 16 or 17 years old. I discovered he has the male version of my name. He said he had taken the train from Germany through Russia to arrive in China. He didn't speak any Mandarin, he informed me. Only 3 words. He said, beer, thank you, and sorry. He was weird, had a strange, soft voice, and moved in this kind of delicate, sauntering way. I felt kind of sorry for him and found his face interesting, so I agreed to help him go into the market and buy random baubles to bring back to his friends. He had a lot of cash on hand and intimated that he had made it selling drugs. This is a massive no-no in China, and I didn't want to know anything about it. We walked around chatting for a long time and decided our route through the labyrinthine street market by flipping a coin. I helped him buy some things. We drank some beers together, bonded, all very standard. There was a bar in the basement of the hostel. It had a pool table and draft beer, and was also teeming with foreigners. When we returned to the hostel, he invited me for beers in the basement. I love pool, so we played a few games for money. He was a shark and beat me every time. Because I was losing, I started to get bored and let my eyes wander around the bar. Then we saw each other. I accidentally met someone's eyes as I was sweeping the room. He was dark, shaved head, very muscular and tall. He had a kind of glowering look in his eyes. Not immediately scary but unsettling. I don't know why, but I stupidly assumed that everyone in the bar must have been a guest at the hostel. Because the man's eyes met mine so exactly, I immediately figured that he must have been watching me. I was wearing a pretty dress, and sometimes when I'm drunk I become very haughty and self-assured, so I gauged that he was probably just checking me out. But I ignored it and went back to talking idly with my new friend. After a while, we were both bored of pool, so we puttered over to the bar for more beer. After we sat down, the man with the glowery brow immediately stood up and beelined over to us. Without even saying hello, he asked, "Is this your boyfriend?" Ha! I thought. I was right, he was checking me out. The skinny blue-eyed boy joked, "Yeah, this is my girlfriend. We just met today." I laughed and told the glowery dude that he wasn't my boyfriend, just a friend. Glowers invited us over to his table, where there were about 20 people sloshing down rum and coke. My friend and I obliged. I felt safe. My friend was with me, and there were lots of other girls at the table. Glowers introduced me to a friend, another hulking dude. I remember he was wearing a striped polo. I don't remember any of their names. I drank a few rum and cokes, and at this point I was totally plastered but functional. I was joking with the skinny boy and laughing a lot. Suddenly, Glowers stands up and says, "Let's go to Tango." Chorus, "What's Tango?" It was a club, just a 10-minute taxi ride away. At first I was reluctant, but cheers of, "Yeah, let's go dance," from the group persuaded me. The entire huge group of people, including my spindly friend, went outside to the street to hail a taxi. I was drunk, confused, and cold, but still laughing and joking around. My twiggy friend gave me his hoodie and then said, "I'm too tired to go to this club. I'm gonna go sleep. Hang the hoodie outside my door when you come back." I felt something fall off the shelf in my head. Twiggy boy had been a sort of safety net. I liked him, and he was giving me a very platonic and brotherly vibe. Not once had he commented on my appearance or asked about my relationship status. Just as a taxi pulled up, he disappeared. The large group of people suddenly dispersed, and the glowering man literally grabbed my arm and threw me into the taxi. You have to understand, I am quite thin and somewhat weak, and these two guys, Glowers and the guy in the striped polo, were enormous, at least 20 to 30 kilograms heavier than me and muscle-bound. I had no idea what was happening at this point. This part is a little blurry. I was sitting in the taxi between these two massive guys, inhaling their excessively applied cologne and deodorant. They were both really sweaty. I didn't even know their names. Glowers instructed the taxi driver to go to the club, and at this point I realized that his Mandarin was not very good. I asked where the big group of people had gone, and he said, "They're not coming." I felt a huge dense pit of fear harden in my stomach. After that, no one spoke for a while. To break the silence, I started asking inane questions. They were both from Nigeria. They were students too, studying medicine. They lived in the city, and I then discovered that they were not guests at the hostel, but just like to go to the basement bar to meet other foreigners. When we arrived at the club, I was shuffled out of the car. I had an impulse to jump back into the taxi and run away. I was very drunk and my balance was somewhat compromised. Before I had a chance to collect myself, Glowers had linked his arm in mine and started walking towards the doors. I didn't resist. I was scared. The club was on the second floor of the building and it was packed with people, mostly Chinese. There were some other Africans there, and Glowers ushered me over to their table. There was one girl with long hair. They appeared to be friends. She said I was pretty and asked, "I shit you not, where did you find this one?" Everyone laughed. I looked down and said nothing. Glowers, still holding my arm, dragged me over to the bar. At this point, I was sort of a rag doll. I was afraid but couldn't seem to motivate myself to bolt. At the bar, he introduced me to the bartender as his new girlfriend. I was shocked and at first said nothing. Apparently this guy was a regular at the club because the bartender, a young Chinese dude with a cool haircut and lots of ear piercings, seemed to recognize him. He replied, "Oh really?" and laughed. "Yes, really," he said. He then put his hands on my waist and started trying to make me dance with him. He also kissed me. Now, to be clear, I didn't feel particularly freaked out or assaulted. This sort of thing has happened to me a lot in life, and I generally just shake it off and carry on with my business. I didn't feel as freaked out by the touching as I did by the fact that he was loudly declaring, to every person he recognized, that I was his new girlfriend. Remember I said I had discerned that Glower's Mandarin was less than excellent. So I pulled away from him and leaned over the bar. I told the bartender, "I'm not his girlfriend. I don't know this man, and he lied to bring me here." The bartender was not altogether alarmed by this, which I found extremely disconcerting. He told me, "You should leave. That was pretty much enough for me. Glowers still had his hands on my waist. I pushed them away and told him I really had to pee and to please let me go to the bathroom. He said, "Okay, but you better come back. Don't try to run off." He capped this off with a weird little fake hollow laugh. I went to the bathroom, which was behind a sort of dividing wall, but on the other side of the club from the elevator and doors. There I encountered a security guard, and I told him there was a man trapping me in the club. He asked me to identify the man. I looked over in the direction of the bar, and he was not there. I freaked out and ran into the bathroom, locked myself in a stall, and stayed there for a few minutes. When I came out, Glowers was standing immediately in front of the doorway, smiling like we were old friends. At this point, he could probably tell that I was afraid of him, because I was making no effort whatsoever to control my facial expressions or demeanor. Nonetheless, he took my arm and led me over to the bar again. The security guard noticed. At the bar, the stylish bartender started teasing him. "She's not really your girlfriend, is she?" At this point, Glowers started to get kind of angry, and I sort of slithered out of his hands, ducked under the level of the bar, and ran over to the bathroom where the security guard still was. The security guard told me, "He's looking for you," and I bolted for the elevator. I was crying, red-faced, and stumbling badly when I crashed into the elevator. I was alone. I breathed in relief. When the elevator doors opened on the ground floor, he was standing right there in front of the doors, and his face had changed. It was intensely disturbing. His brows were all knitted up and contorted, forming a weird knob shape over his eyes, which were engulfed in shadow. His mouth was twisted into a sneering frown. I was paralyzed in the elevator. There was another security guard on the ground floor watching this happen. That guard had no context whatsoever for what was going on. Glowers started shouting at me very loudly and aggressively. Things like, "You're a rude bitch, you know that? And you stupid shit. When a guy invites you to a club, you don't run away without saying goodbye. And you're disgusting." I was mostly just bewildered, crying from fear, and trying to will my legs to take me the hell out of the elevator. I finally felt the damn brake. Adrenaline pumped through my body, and I didn't run. I flew out of the elevator. Maybe the fastest I've ever run in my life. I charged through the parking lot, insane with terror, arms flailing. At this point, there was a crowd of security guards watching this happen, but none of them moved. They all just kind of stared blankly at the scene. I knew that the guy was chasing me because I could hear his feet, and he was screaming curse words at me the entire time. I don't know how close he was, and I didn't look behind me. I just ran. Had no idea where I was going. It was really late, I think around 3 a.m., and taxis were scarce. But there was one slowly circling the area. I ran for the car and jumped inside, slammed the door, and screamed at the driver that I was being chased by a crazy man and to please just drive in any direction at all. The guy actually ended up getting pretty close to the taxi. One of the last things he screamed at me hit me really hard. He said, "You're fucking ugly. I would never touch you. I thought of you as a sister, you greedy bitch." So yeah, asked my taxi driver to just drive around randomly for a while, then returned to the hostel and cloistered myself in my room. I returned my twiggy friend's hoodie in the morning, hanging it outside his room. I sometimes find that I have a kind of spiritual bent to my thinking, and at the time I imagined him as some sort of apparition whose gift had protected me that night. Never saw any of these people again. Let me just preface this story as to why I was traveling alone. So, one of my best friends, Kyla, and I work seasonally at a hiking lodge in BC for the summer. We're both girls in our early 20s. She lives and goes to school in New Brunswick, and I live and work as a chef in Toronto for the winter. We decided this year, as I bought a car, instead of flying back home, we would do an epic Canadian coast-to-coast road trip. Everything was going wonderfully, so wonderfully in fact, we ended up staying longer in a few unexpected places and had to cut our East Coast portion of the trip short. Now my friend Kalia started her schooling on November 1st. So I dropped her home in Moncton, New Brunswick on Halloween and stayed the night at her place, planning to head back to Toronto the next day. After a few glasses of Chardonnay and some laughs, I decided I couldn't come this close to the East Coast and not see the Cabot Trail in Nova Scotia, something that has been on my bucket list for years. So knowing I still had a week more of vacation before my winter contract, I hastily booked a hostel for the next day, November 1st, at the Acolyte Hostel on the Cabot Trail. When I booked, only one option came up. I assumed because I waited until the last minute to book a private dorm with a queen-sized bed for $35. I thought, what a bargain, and booked immediately. I left Kyla's house in Moncton at 7 a.m. knowing it was a long drive. Now the Cabot Trail is roughly 150 kilometers long, so I thought to be safe, I'd plug the hostel address into my Google Maps and head straight there to get my bearings. I would arrive at the hostel for roughly noon. Knowing it was too early to check in, I figured I'd consult with front desk and figure out the nearby hiking trails and bring my bags in later. I was about to arrive at my hostel, according to Google, but all around me was nothing but farmland. Google instructed me, the destination is on your left. I saw nothing. About 50 yards up the road, I saw a wire bar bent to look like the letter, a spray painted bright red. I was staying at the Acolyte Hostel, so I guessed that must be the place, and followed the dirt road. It led me to what I can only describe as a dilapidated barn. No signage, there were 2 cars parked in front, so I parked alongside and got out of my car to try and figure out where I was. Once I got out, a smallish man, around mid-40s with dark hair and intense eyes, popped out of the barn and asked me if I was staying with them tonight. I said yes. He asked why I booked so last minute, and I explained to him my situation. Seemingly satisfied with my answer, he insisted on taking me on the grand tour of the barn. The first thing I noticed was that the entirety of the barn had been dug out around its foundation, about 5 feet deep and 3 feet around. He led me across some particle board laid down as a sort of ramp leading inside. The second thing I noticed about the property is that there were no windows. This was clearly a barn meant for livestock. The gentleman leading me on this tour was named Kevin, the owner. He proceeded to tell me his grand plans for the space. It all seemed pretty far-fetched, as it was just a big old barn with particle boards separating most of the rooms. He led me up the skeleton stairs made of plywood and 2x4s to the cabin loft, where I would be sleeping that night, along with his family, the mother of his 5-year-old son, his son, and Kevin's own mother, who insisted I call her mom. The upstairs was certainly open concept. A frail curtain separated the beds to the sides with a large open area in the middle. I asked if I was his only occupant that night. He said yes. I had a feeling he didn't often get occupants. I told him I was interested in the hikes in the area and wanted to get to them before it got dark. He gave me very detailed instructions of his favorite hikes and how to get to them, and off I went. I figured the place wasn't ideal, and I wished the website would have let me know it was still being built. But hey, I booked last minute and beggars can't be choosers. Plus, he was very friendly and helpful on my hiking advice. I hiked the area until it started getting dark. I didn't pack enough food for the day, but I figured I'd head into town for dinner. The nearest town was clearly a booming tourist destination during the summer, but now in the off-season, it was a ghost town. All the hotels and B&Bs in the area were boarded up. Such a ghost town, even the liquor store was closed for the off-season. Finally, I found a dark, dingy, empty bar to eat dinner. It was, to phrase lightly, a disappointing supper. I had this romantic image in my head of me sitting on the harbor front, sipping on bubbly, slurping back some ocean-fresh oysters. I was assured by the server/bartender/cook the fried oysters I had ordered were definitely not fresh. I didn't ask. I figure with all my options for things to do and see exhausted, I should just head back to the hostel and read my book. Kyla. I got back for roughly 8 p.m. I could smell the family that lived there was in the midst of cooking dinner. A little boy ran down the wood steps to greet me. He yelled, as little boys always do, "My name is JP. What's yours?" I say, "Nice to meet you, JP. My name is Alex." He immediately asked if I wanted to come play. I said definitely. Just let me put my bags down in my room first. He followed me through the translucent curtains to my room. So instead of getting settled in, I just headed straight out into the main area. I started throwing a foam ball around with JP. His mother, father, Kevin, and grandmother were all just sitting down to eat without even acknowledging we were there, playing in front of them. The mother and father just start what seems to be a basic argument, which then turns into them yelling at each other. Completely weirded out, I told JP, I need to go to my room and call my mommy, as she is wondering where I am. Of course, the boy, who doesn't understand proper boundaries, yet follows me through the curtains and sits on my bed. I try taking his attention away from his family fighting, so I start asking him where he goes to school, his favorite color, etc. His mother starts calling for him. He doesn't answer. Instead chooses to sit in my lap and hug me. Not wanting to cause any problems, I yell to the mother he is in my room. She runs in and snatches him off my lap and yells to the father, "I know what you're like when you get this angry. I'm taking JP. Don't follow us." I hear her book it down the stairs and him run after her. I hear a car start up in the lot and not just drive but fucking peel out of that driveway. I hear him cursing. A door slams and then the sound of the excavator I had seen outside earlier that day came on. I guess he wanted to do some handy work to let off some steam. Now just left upstairs is me and Grandma. I walk out of my not-so-private curtained room with my bag and say, "Listen, you guys have been great hosts, but I should go." She starts rubbing my arm and telling me to stay, explaining her daughter-in-law doesn't understand Kevin like she does, and she's the real problem. Now I'm ready to tell Mom to fuck right off and just leave, until I realize she still has a knife in her hand from cooking dinner. It's only a 4-inch paring knife, but with intent, I'm sure it would do some damage. I don't think she meant it as a threat. I think she was just a kooky old bird who didn't understand. Maybe don't hold a knife while trying to console a stranger. So I go along with what she is saying, while she rubs my arm with one hand and flails the knife around in the other. I inch closer and closer downstairs and toward the door. She keeps rubbing my arm and shoulders with her free hand, telling me to stay, and that her grandson is special, and before I even booked the night he had a premonition I would be staying with them. As soon as I get out the door, I run towards my car. I start my engine and back up in the lot to get out of there. Kevin in the excavator blocks the path, with about a 5-foot ditch on one side of the drive and forest behind me. He gets out, says he's sorry, and tells me I should stay. He'll make it up to me. Grandma comes out with the knife still in hand, saying it's Kevin's fault I'm leaving. They bicker for 5 full minutes until I yell if they don't let me leave, I'm calling the police. All of a sudden they get super defensive, like I'm the one being unreasonable. So I turn off my engine and start to dial. Kevin gets back in his excavator and starts backing up. As soon as he's far enough, I can see an opening to drive across the grass. I turn my engine back on and rip out of the drive. I'm sure doing a number on the suspension of my little sedan. As soon as the property is out of sight, I go to call my friend Kyla. No service. I remembered back to earlier in the afternoon when I first got to the hostel. I was going to check my messages and saw the no service sign. Even I wanted to, I wouldn't have been able to call the cops. I drove the 6 hours straight to Moncton, New Brunswick and stayed with